Granada's Islamic past is written in stone. The Alhambra Palace, symbol of centuries of Moorish rule. But the Moors were expelled more than 500 years ago. Old Granada fell into disrepair, but is now being revived. A new generation of Muslims are living here now, immigrants from Morocco, bringing a flavour of the souk to these Spanish streets and drawing visitors in behind them. People live side by side in this city just like they used to, Muslims, Christians and Jews, says shopkeeper Saeed Al-Khouf. This street is frequented by tourists too, from all parts of the world. This was once the capital of the Muslim province of Al-Andalus. Today's Muslims began arriving in large numbers 30 years ago. Property prices were low then, security was poor. At first they rented a small mosque in which to pray. A larger mosque was built 6 years ago, paid for by the Emirate of Sharjah in the Gulf. Businesses opened, tea houses and small shops. Now the area is thriving.
We call it the golden age of the Islam in the medieval times, the Al-Andalus. We as Muslims of Europe and of Germany, we can learn many things from this place, like to live more devotional, to love more devotional, to learn how to love.
Many of the visitors to Granada are Muslims from abroad, keen to explore beyond the Alhambra. Spain is coming to terms with its Islamic past and with the Muslims now living within its borders. Alex Kruger, BBC News.
That there was essentially peace and harmony between the Western world and the Islamic world until the Crusaders gave into the barbarism, savagery, and imperialism that we all know is intrinsic in the Western character, and invaded the Middle East. Now, of course, there are several problems with this. The first problem is that it isn't true. The first crusade was called in 1095. I'll return to this, but the first crusade was called in the year 1095, and the Crusaders arrived in Jerusalem in 1099. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, died in 632, and by 642, his armies had invaded and conquered Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, and continued going and conquered in rapid succession North Africa, up through Spain, into France, as well as besieging Constantinople by 711 and sweeping over Persia and into India. All by the 8th century, all within 100 years of Muhammad's death. They had carried out a record of conquest unparalleled in human history. And it was all done for religious reasons that were delineated by the same Prophet of Islam in the holy book that he left for the Muslims and in traditions that recorded his words and deeds, which are considered normative for Muslims. So, all that was hundreds of years before there was ever any crusade. And yet, we are to believe that all the hostility between the West and the Islamic world comes from the Crusades. Obviously, the point of this, there are several goals designed to be put forth in this, by means of this historical myth, to blunt the impact of the violence committed in the name of Islam that we see today. Because after all, Christianity and Christians are just as bad, and look what they did. And to disarm resistance to Islamization, resistance to the Islamization of Europe, resistance to Islamization anywhere, by sapping our own cultural self-confidence and peddling a moral equivalence that would make us believe, and has made many people believe, including Mr. Clinton, but not limited to him, that there's really no point in resisting this, because after all, nobody's hands are clean. We all have a spotted historical record, and nobody can say their culture is superior to any others, or that a culture is worth defending against a massive, full-scale cultural invasion. That would be improper, not only racist, but it would be improper in terms of this historical myth. Because why would there be a need to resist when we've acted the same way? And what's more, and this is where Al-Andalus comes in, why would there be a need to resist when under Islamic rule in the past, everything was so wonderful. And so that's where we get to Muslim Spain. And this is the product of primarily a scholar named Maria Rosa Menocal in her book, The Ornament of the World. But it is, here again, by no means limited to her work. We are told that in Spain, in the Middle Ages, after the Muslim conquest of the 7th century and the 8th century, there was a proto-multiculturalist paradise in which Jews and Christians and Muslims lived together in harmony, and there was a flowering of science, of intellectual endeavor, and of artistic achievement. And here again, it's a wonderful story, but it's false, and it's deliberately, manipulatively false in order to proffer various political ends. It is to suggest, in other words, several things. That Islamic terror is an epiphenomenon. That violence committed in the name of Islam is something that we need not be concerned about, because for the most part, Muslims have not behaved this way. They've really been just wonderful. And to suggest that there is a large mainstream, authoritative, and ultimately dominant tradition within Islam that is tolerant, pluralistic, and ultimately fundamentally benign, such that, and this is the subtext, should it happen that a Muslim Spain were revived, or a Muslim France created, or an Islamic Republic of the Netherlands, or what have you, then we need not be concerned about that, because it will be a wonderful, benign, multiculturalist paradise, just like Spain. And so the goals of this are clear.
Now, you write about something in the book that was new to me, and that is the dream of Al-Andalus. That is that. So would you just comment on that? First of all, tell us what the dream is, and then go ahead and debunk it, as you do so robustly.
It's a 19th century myth that was actually, as I believe...
But it's still current today.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? All right.
It was started by many Jews to sort of chastise growing anti-Semitism in Europe by saying, look, the Muslims treated us better in Andalus.
Muslims occupy the
Spain.
Iberian Peninsula for about 700 years. And the notion is that life was pretty good there, and that it was an open, cosmopolitan kind of society. Christians lived there, Jews lived there, and it was. Fear not, because that's the Muslim world of the future. And you say no.
No, of course that's historically false.
It is.
I mean, there were brief moments when Jewish scholars, even Jewish viziers or whatever, could have some sort of influence. But in 1066, 5,000 Jews were massacred in Grenada. The analogy that I use...
You point out, which I didn't know, that Maimonides, who's one of the great Jewish scholars of all the centuries, was a refugee from
Andalusia.
Al-Andalus.
The analogy I use is with the Jim Crow South. Now, you can go back and look at black culture in the South from 1900 to 1960, and you can find poets, and you can find business owners, and you can find people getting college degrees. Nobody, based on that, would go back and say, oh, it was a wonderful... And in fact, the old segregationists used to make that argument. I can remember them making it, right?